I, 29M, felt I had the best idea for a family bonding trip. I come from what most people would term a close-knit family, but if you ask me, that phrase is carrying a lot of weight here. I have two siblings, my younger brother Ben, who is 26, and my younger sister Claire, who is 24. Ben and I are quite close, typical brother stuff. We can shift from bickering one minute to supporting each other the next. However, with Claire, things are different. Claire grew up as the golden child, the baby of the family who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Meanwhile, Ben and I had to be responsible, whereas Claire could get away with almost anything. Did you forget to do a chore? She was too tired. Poor grade? She's just more creative. But if I even left a sock on the floor, it was as if I'd committed a grave sin. That partiality built a chasm between us that became wider as we grew older. It's not that I don't love Claire. I do. She is my sister after all. But her entitlement has irritated me, and Ben tolerates her behavior even less than I do. Put the two of them in a room for 5 minutes, and they're almost certainly going to argue. One incident that stands out to me occurred just last Christmas. Claire arrived at our family's gift exchange empty-handed, claiming to be just a broke college student. But a few days later, she was flaunting her new iPhone and designer boots on Instagram. Ben called her out, and she burst into tears, accusing him of being materialistic. And as always, our parents consoled her. Typical. I have always tried to be the bigger person, though. I thought that when we grew older, Claire would mature, and our parents would begin treating us equally. I hoped that one day we might all laugh about our previous differences. And then, earlier this year, something amazing happened. I won the lottery at work. I received a bonus that made my jaw drop. After the first shock had worn off, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, something special for my family. My parents' anniversary was approaching, and I thought it would be fantastic to surprise them with a family vacation. We hadn't taken a trip together since Claire was in high school, and it was only a weekend at a neighboring lake. This time, I decided to go all out. A week in Hawaii with all costs paid. Flights, a luxury resort, activities, the works. Hawaii wasn't chosen at random. My parents went there on their honeymoon, so I thought it would be incredibly meaningful for them to return to the spot where it all started, this time with their children. Plus, who doesn't adore Hawaii? Sun, sand, and surf, it's paradise. When I told my parents about the trip, their emotions were amazing. My mother burst into tears, and my father, who generally keeps a calm demeanor, was obviously thrilled. They instantly began sharing honeymoon stories, and it was a truly sweet moment. I felt like I just won Son of the Year. Ben's reaction was just what I had planned. He begged me and instantly began raving about all the things we might do together, surfing, hiking, and perhaps skydiving if we could persuade our parents. His enthusiasm was contagious, and I became even more excited for the trip. Then there was Claire. I'll confess that I was a little concerned about how she would react, but to my amazement, she appeared truly excited. She instantly began talking about all she wanted to do and the Instagram posts she had planned. I rolled my eyes internally at that point, but at least she was excited. For a while, I believed this vacation would bring us all closer together. Perhaps this was the breakthrough our family needed. Oh, how naive I was. The issues began very immediately. Claire, as usual, decided that because I was footing the cash, she should plan the trip. She did not ask, she demanded. "You're not great at planning stuff," she replied. "Just hand it over to me, and I'll make sure we have the best time ever." Now I knew why I wanted to plan the trip myself. First and foremost, it was my gift, and I wanted to surprise everyone with the activities I chose. But most importantly, I know my sister. Claire enjoys champagne on a beer budget when someone else pays. If I let her take over, we'd end up with private jet tours of the islands and an absurd level of luxury. I tried explaining this to my parents, hoping they'd support me, but they, in their infinite wisdom, suggested a compromise. "If you're busy," they said, "maybe you could let Claire help plan the activities." I told them I wanted the activities to be a surprise, hoping that would settle it. But Claire refused to let it go. She insisted on knowing everything in advance so she could pack the right outfits. I promised her that nothing would surprise her, but she persisted. Looking back, I should have held my ground. But I wanted to keep the peace, so I eventually gave her the itinerary. Claire made a big mistake. The moment she got her hands on it, she went into control freak mode. She called me right away, breaking my meticulously planned agenda apart. According to her, everything needed to be adjusted to make everyone more comfortable. And guess what? Some of her suggestions made sense, so, like an idiot, I agreed to make a few modifications, and that was all the incentive she needed. Claire was suddenly acting as if she was in charge of the entire vacation. She stated in our family group chat that she'd taken over the planning and made some changes. At first, her changes weren't too bad. She suggested we all wear similar clothing every day, which was actually rather adorable. But then things began to spiral. 1 week before the trip, I checked into my account to double-check certain details, and my jaw dropped to the floor. Claire had canceled several of the events I had scheduled, things I had chosen because I knew everyone would enjoy them, and replaced them with her own favorites. She even wrote in the family chat about her executive decisions on the agenda, urging everyone to follow her example. I was furious. This was intended to be my gift to the family, but she had fully hijacked it. I called her, trying to remain calm, but Claire was completely unapologetic. "I'm better at planning," she claimed. "You should be grateful I'm helping." Grateful? I was about to explode. Following my chat with Claire, I felt a tight knot of frustration. I had gone out of my way to prepare an incredible trip, and she was turning it into a power battle. The following night, my phone rang. It was my parents, and they didn't sound pleased. Claire had apparently approached them with a sob story about how I was ruling everything by not allowing her to take over the preparations. She portrayed herself as a misunderstood, innocent girl who only wanted everyone to have a good time. And they bought it. Don't ask me how. "You should let Claire have a say," they said, sounding like they were talking to a toddler rather than a grown man who'd worked hard to pay for this whole thing. "It doesn't matter who plans it. We are family, right?" It felt like I was in another reality. I had spent hours researching the finest activities, arranging tickets and making reservations, and suddenly, I was the bad guy for wanting to keep to my own schedule? Nobody seemed to recall that this was my gift to them. For a brief time, I considered calling the whole thing off. But then I took a big breath and decided to take the high road. That was okay, I thought. If Claire really wants to be in charge, I'll just step back and let her do it. Maybe it wouldn't be the trip I had planned, but I could still make the most of it. I'd just enjoy the time with my family, even if things didn't go as planned. So I held my tongue, let Claire make a few more changes, and prayed for the best. 2 days before we were meant to depart, I had a flicker of hope that all might work out. My brother Ben and I had been messaging about everything we were looking forward to, and he was just as excited as I was. But then, only 24 hours before we were supposed to take off, I received a warning from the airline that my tickets had been canceled. At first, I assumed it was an error. I called the airline in a panic, only to be told that the cancellation was from my account and that there was nothing they could do about it. In that moment, I realized who was behind it. Claire. I contacted her right away, trying to seem calm, but inwardly I was angry. When she picked up, she pretended everything was just normal. "Hey," she said in an annoyingly cheerful voice, as if she hadn't just ruined my plans. "Can you explain why my ticket was canceled?" I inquired, my voice barely steady. "Oh, that?" she exclaimed, grinning as if it were some harmless trick. "Isn't that funny? I was seeing red." "Well, here's the thing," she said in a tone that suggested she was explaining something very clear to a child. "I know you paid for everything, but we just can't have you on the vacation. You're overly controlling, and your bad vibes will spoil it for everyone." For a minute, I was dumbfounded. Is the trip I had planned and paid for, which I had prepared as a gift for my family, suddenly taking place without me? Claire had convinced everyone that I was the problem, and they had all bought into it? Something in me suddenly snapped. Without saying anything further, I hung up the phone, got into my account, and canceled Claire's ticket. Then, just to be safe, I changed the password on the account so she couldn't access anything else. I then posted a message to the family group chat saying, "I've canceled Claire's ticket because she decided I'm not welcome on the trip I paid for. If anyone else wants to stay with her, I'll gladly cancel their tickets as well." The consequences were immediate. My phone filled up with notifications. Ben made the first call, and he was as astonished as I was by the whole incident. He stated unequivocally that he had no knowledge of Claire's plan to throw me off the trip. Apparently, she had made up some intricate scenario in which neither he nor my parents were involved. While I was still speaking with him, my folks called. They were upset, accusing me of being petty and vindictive for canceling her ticket. I took a long breath and reiterated that this was supposed to be my gift to the family, not a free-for-all for Claire to dictate. I told them that if they didn't want me there, that was fine. I'd go alone. But I wasn't ready to give up my hard-earned money and be left behind. To their credit, my parents were astonished when I informed them Claire had canceled my ticket without informing anybody. They maintained they had never asked her to do that, but they were also upset that I had retaliated by canceling hers. They kept demanding that we take this trip as a family. I made it obvious that I was not going to allow Claire to influence me anymore. If she wanted a vacation, she could pay for it herself. Meanwhile, Claire was sending me angry text messages. She called me every term in the book, accusing me of being a terrible brother and ruining everything. I simply forwarded all of her texts to my parents, allowing them to see the side of Claire they'd been blind to for so long. A short time later, my father called back. He sounded exhausted, almost defeated. He claimed he'd had a long conversation with Claire, and she was willing to apologize if I would be the bigger person and rebook her ticket. Part of me wanted to say no. Why should I be the one to offer an olive branch after she attempted to kick me off my own trip? But another part of me was curious about how it would turn out. I agreed to a conference call, and my father added Claire to the line. She began by saying, "Look, I'm sorry, okay?" In the most fake tone I had ever heard. She didn't apologize at all. She was simply trying to obtain what she wanted. Dad cut her off, feeling frustrated. "Claire," he replied, "you went too far in canceling your brother's ticket. This whole thing was his gift to us, and you had no right to take over." Claire exclaimed, "I did the correct thing." She yelled, "He was going to wreck everything with his domineering attitude." There was a lengthy, uneasy silence following that. I could definitely hear the gears moving in my father's head as he understood how far Claire was ready to go to have her way. He hung up the phone without saying anything more. I sat there for a bit, allowing everything to sink in. I knew this was a watershed moment, not only for the vacation but for our entire family. My father had always been afraid to face Claire, but he couldn't ignore it any longer. After years of tolerating her conduct, he was now beginning to see things clearly. A few minutes later, he called me again, sounding somber and confused. "I don't know what to do," he muttered, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I don't know how to choose between my kids." I felt sorry for him for a second. I could see he was torn, but at the same time I felt relieved. Maybe my parents were finally seeing Claire for who she truly was. As I sit here now, I'm feeling a range of emotions. I know I did the right thing by sticking up for myself, but it's unfortunate that it came to this. This was not how I had envisioned the trip going at all. I wanted it to be a time for all of us to reconnect and create new memories together. And, despite all, Claire remains a member of the family. My brother and I can go on without her, but I know my parents will be upset. However, perhaps this is the wake-up call we all needed. Maybe my parents will realize that repeatedly coddling Claire has just increased her feeling of entitlement. So that's where things stand. I'm packed and ready to embark on this trip that I planned and paid for, but the delight I once felt has been replaced by a knot of fear in my gut. My brother is still planning to attend, my parents are undecided, and Claire? Well, she's probably busy plotting her retribution. Whatever happens next, I can say that I finally stood up for myself. The day of the trip arrived, and it was tense to say the least. My brother Ben was as excited as always, hopping around like a kid on Christmas morning. In contrast, my parents appeared to be traveling to a funeral rather than a tropical paradise. I could see the disappointment on their expressions, and I felt it myself. We should be here as a full family, but I knew better than to carry that shame. Claire made her decisions, and as much as it grieved my parents, I couldn't keep placing myself last just to keep the peace. As we boarded the plane, I vowed to make the best of the situation. I mean, it's Hawaii, correct? Beaches, palm trees, and warm sun. I wasn't going to let Claire's drama spoil the trip for the rest of us. But even as we took off, there remained a nagging feeling that the matter wasn't over. I could already see the look on my mother's face, that quiet sadness she attempted to disguise but couldn't quite suppress. It seemed as if she had lost something valuable. And in a way, she did. We all had. Once we landed, however, things began to change. The instant we went outside into the Hawaiian air, the atmosphere transformed. The aroma of salt water mingled with plumeria blossoms filled the air, and the sight of palm trees waving in the breeze was enough to make anyone forget about their problems. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and I noticed the same thing happening to my parents. For the first time in days, my mother smiled, a true, genuine smile. And just like that, I realized this trip could still be everything I wanted it to be, even if it didn't go precisely as planned. On the first day, we all settled into our resort rooms and had some time to relax. Ben and I headed to the beach very immediately. We rented snorkeling equipment and spent hours swimming with the fish, completely immersed in the underwater world. It felt weird, as if we had finally left the stress and family drama of home. It was ideal for that particular afternoon. Later, we met up with my parents for dinner at a beachfront restaurant. For a little time, as we sat there watching the sunset, everything was exactly as I had anticipated. We laughed, told stories, and toasted my parents' anniversary. For the first time in years, it felt like we were truly happy, simply enjoying one another's company with no stress lurking beneath the surface. However, the calm did not last. My phone was constantly buzzing with Claire's messages all week. I initially disregarded them, figuring she would just leave it go. But it was instantly evident that Claire was not going to back down. Her texts ranged from outrage, "I hope you all get sunburned and eaten by sharks," to self-pity. "I can't believe my own family would abandon me like this." I tried to brush it off, but it got to my parents, particularly my mother. Every several hours, she'd check in with Claire, reassuring her and explaining that she might have been here if she'd simply been respectful. But it was like talking to a wall. By midweek, even my father, who is typically the calmest person in the room, was losing patience. One night after supper, he turned to my mother and said, "That's enough. She made the bed, and now she has to lie in it. We're not here to babysit her from across the ocean." It was a minor win, but it felt significant. For once, my parents did not go out of their way to please Claire. They were finally seeing things in the same manner I had for years. And, as difficult as it was for them, I believe they understood that was the only way to reach her. We tried to get back into the vacation mindset, and to my relief, the distractions of Hawaii worked their magic. We attended a private luau, tried our hand at surfing, not pretty by the way, and even took a helicopter tour of the islands. Every day felt like a dream come true, with experiences I knew I'd cherish for years. The tension was still present, hovering in the background, but it was easier to ignore while we were surrounded by paradise. Then, just when I thought we were safe, Claire pulled one last trick from a distance. During our helicopter tour, my phone vibrated with a text from Ben, who had checked his messages while we waited. Claire had chosen to escalate the situation further. She had gone to our mutual friends back home, telling them a whole new story about how I had abandoned her on this trip and stolen her ticket out of spite. By the time we landed, I had received around a dozen texts from friends and relatives, all inquiring what was going on. My first thought was to be angry, but I took a long breath and let it go. I decided right there that I was not going to get dragged back into her games. Instead, I gently responded to everyone who had messaged me, explaining that the trip was a present to the family and that I had only canceled Claire's ticket after she attempted to cancel my own. Most individuals were astonished, but supportive. Some even admitted to having their own experiences with Claire's entitlement. And as annoying as it was to know that she was bringing our conflict to people outside the family, I couldn't deny that it felt wonderful to finally give my side of the story. That night, after we'd finished another perfect day visiting Hawaii, my parents grabbed me aside. They congratulated me for everything I'd done to make this trip possible and expressed regret for how things had turned out. They even admitted that Claire had gotten away with too much for too long. Hearing them say that felt like a great weight had been lifted off my chest. It was the validation I'd been seeking for years. As we sat there, facing the ocean under a starry sky, I came to a realization. This trip was more than just commemorating my parents' anniversary or bringing us all together. It was about finally confronting the flaws in our family that we had been covering up for so long. And perhaps, just maybe, that was the first step toward a healthier, more honest relationship. For the remainder of the vacation, I concentrated on enjoying every minute. I spent time with my parents, went on adventures with Ben, and enjoyed the beauty of Hawaii without allowing Claire's drama to take away any of my delight. When we boarded the jet back home, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. We hadn't finished everything, but we had begun something, and no matter how difficult it was, I knew it was a positive step forward. When we returned from Hawaii, I felt both calm and worried about what awaited us. The trip had given me a sense of calm that I hadn't had in years, but I knew that once we returned home, the reality of our family drama would hit us again. And sure enough, as soon as we came in the door, we were right back in the thick of it. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was the overwhelming volume of Claire's messages. Most of them were a combination of insults and guilt trips. She accused me of betraying her, turning our parents against her, and abandoning her while we lived it up in paradise. It was taxing, and I honestly didn't have the energy to respond to anything. I just wanted to save the wonderful memories from the vacation without having her ruin them. My parents, on the other hand, didn't take it so readily. Claire arrived at their house almost immediately, still indignant and behaving like the victim. She went on and on about how we had conspired against her and purposefully omitted her from the trip. I could only envision the scene, Claire standing in the center of their living room, hands on her hips, leveling charges as if it were her right. For once, my parents did not back down. They stood their ground, reminding her that she had canceled my ticket and attempted to take over the entire trip. But Claire didn't hear it. To her, the facts were irrelevant. She was certain she had been harmed, and nothing anyone said would change her opinion. I could tell from chatting with my mother later that night that she was exhausted. Dealing with Claire was like dealing with a tornado. You could try to prepare, but it always left devastation in its wake. Then the true repercussions began. Claire didn't stop with complaining to our parents. No, she chose to go even further. She began contacting more family members and sharing her version of the story. She claimed that I exiled her from the family, that I used the trip to brag and make her feel small, and that my parents had betrayed her by siding with me. My phone quickly became inundated with messages from family requesting my side of the story. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping it would all go away. But Claire made it clear that she was not going to let this go. She wanted everyone to know that she had been wronged, and she planned to make me the villain in her story. Reluctantly, I began responding to those who had reached out. I detailed what had truly occurred, adhering to the truth. I could see several of them were taken aback, perhaps even embarrassed by Claire's manipulation. Some even apologized for expecting the worst, which was reassuring. Still, the whole experience was taxing. I didn't expect returning from a family vacation to feel like stepping into a battleground. The strangest aspect was how my parents responded. Even after everything had happened, they remained hopeful that we could work things out with Claire. I could see it in my mother's face every time her phone rang, as if she was hoping for a miracle that would restore everything to normal. She kept emphasizing, "She's still family," as if it meant everything. However, it was evident to me that things could not be restored to their previous state. The trip had altered us, for better or worse, and pretending everything was fine wouldn't help. My brother, on the other hand, was less forgiving. Ben was always the one to call Claire up on her bullshit, and he'd had enough. "If she wants to be the victim, let her," he told me one night as we caught up, "but I'm not letting her drag me into her mess anymore." I couldn't have agreed more. It felt like we'd both grown up seeing Claire get her way through manipulation, and now we were both over it. As the weeks passed, Claire's drama subsided. She sought new people to complain to and new methods to portray herself as the martyr, and the focus steadily turned away from me and onto her. I won't lie, it was a relief. I could finally concentrate on my life without continuously glancing over my shoulder, waiting for the next explosion. But just as I thought things were getting better, my parents called and dropped a surprise. Claire had been struggling to pay her rent, so she wanted to come back in with them. They were torn. They wanted to help her, but they also understood that allowing her to return home would only lead to more of the same problems we had been dealing with for years. I was irritated, to say the least. After everything she had put us through, after attempting to take over my vacation, spread lies about me, and divide our family against one another, she was still looking for a safety net. And as much as I wanted to be supportive of my parents, I couldn't help but feel like this was Claire's way of avoiding taking responsibility for her actions. So, I sat down with my parents and had an open discussion. I expressed my gratitude for the trip, how much it meant to me, and how much I loved our time together. But I also warned them that if they allowed Claire to move back in without setting boundaries, we'd be right back where we started. I told them that tolerating her conduct would not benefit anyone. It would only prevent her from maturing. To my amazement, they genuinely listened. My father agreed that if Claire wanted to move back home, she would have to demonstrate a commitment to modifying her behavior. They determined that if she returned, she would have to get a steady job, pay rent, and demonstrate some accountability. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. When they told Claire the news, she wasn't pleased. She accused them of favoring me, abandoning her, and making her life harder. But they refused to budge. They remained steadfast, stressing that if she wanted their support, she had to earn it. That is where things stand. For the first time, my parents are standing up to Claire, and it feels like a burden has been removed from all of us. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know we've finally begun to break free from the cycle we'd been stuck in for so long. I'm cautiously optimistic that this will be the wake-up call Claire requires to turn things around, but I'm also realistic. Change is difficult, especially for someone who is accustomed to getting their way. As for me, I am focused on going forward. I've been saving for another trip, perhaps even a family vacation someday, one where everyone can get together without drama or hatred. But for now, I'm pleased knowing that I've finally taken a stance for myself, my family, and the sort of life I want to lead. And perhaps, just maybe, that marks the beginning of something better for all of us. It's been a few months since the Hawaii vacation, and much has changed. My parents' boundaries with Claire caused unexpected changes. She was obviously upset at first. She sulked for a few weeks, scarcely conversing with our parents and avoiding family events. But over time, I noticed something surprising. Claire began to step up. For starters, she had a solid job. She persevered with it despite the lack of glamour. She was actually paying rent to my parents, something neither of us expected to see. It wasn't flawless. She'd still fall back into old patterns on occasion, but the fact that she was trying was more than we could have asked for. I believe my parents' choice to finally hold Mom accountable was a shock to her system. She was so accustomed to them going out of their way to accommodate her that when they eventually drew a line in the sand, she had no choice but to change, or at least try. I'd be lying if I claimed everything was instantly wonderful between us. Both sides continue to harbor feelings of hatred and hurt. Claire and I aren't close, and I'm not sure we ever will be. However, there is a new understanding among us, a sense that we are all on our own paths now, figuring things out for ourselves rather than continually tripping on each other's toes. For the first time, we feel like we're a family by choice rather than circumstance. We don't see each other as often, but when we do, there's a calmness that wasn't there before. One day, my mother called to tell me Claire had mentioned the Hawaii vacation. Apparently, she admitted that she went too far, that she was caught up in her own emotions, and lashed out at me harshly. My mother was pleased, as if Claire had made a significant step forward with that modest acknowledgement. And perhaps it was. For someone who had spent years evading responsibility, even a minor concession like that felt monumental. As for my parents, I believe they are finally seeing Claire more clearly. They still love her, of course, but they are no longer giving in to her every whim and allowing her to evade the repercussions of her behavior. They've started setting boundaries with her, which I never expected to see. It's as if the Hawaii vacation forced everyone to wake up and face reality. In the months since the trip, I've focused on going forward. I've pushed myself into work, begun arranging my next holiday, and contemplated returning to school for an advanced degree. My bond with Ben is stronger than ever. We've bonded over the entire situation, and he's been my support throughout. In fact, we've already planned a brothers' trip next year. Just the two of us, no drama involved. The other day, Ben and I met Claire for lunch. It was difficult at first, but we eventually fell into a comfortable groove. There were no huge speeches or apologizes, but I could tell Claire was trying. She inquired about our lives, offered some of her own experiences, and genuinely listened. It wasn't the warm, fluffy family reunion you'd expect from a movie, but it seemed like a step forward, a quiet acknowledgement that we're all still here, still family, and still trying. I won't pretend everything is miraculously wonderful now, but it seems like a new beginning. We all learned a lot on our Hawaii vacation, and as difficult as it was, I believe it was precisely what we needed to move ahead. The entitlement, resentment, and constant sensation of being set against one another are still present, but they are quieter and less intense. Maybe one day we'll look back and chuckle about it all, but for now, I'm just glad we got through it with some sort of calm. Looking back, I realized the Hawaii trip was more than simply a vacation. It marked a turning point for all of us. It pushed us to confront the reality of our family dynamic, ultimately breaking the cycle of coddling and animosity that had been building for years. And while we're not perfect, I believe we're finally on the right track. I'm not sure what the future holds for Claire or my family as a whole, but I know I'm ready to move forward with my life, knowing I stood up for myself and set boundaries I should have years ago. There, more than anything, feels like the true win. And there concludes the story. If there is anything else you would like me to add or change, please let me know.